So one of the nice things about Haystack and our little search community is that we have people coming back, regular visitors to Haystack, or even regular presenters. So we can actually track their search progress and see how they go. One of them is Julien from Wallapop. Wallapop is the largest Spanish C2C marketplace, and he's talking about how precision and recall relate to actual business metrics in their experience. And Julien, the stage is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Matthias. And yes, I'm Julien, French, but I live in Barcelona. So super happy to be here. I hope you will enjoy. Actually, it will not be super technical. The idea is that you get some intuition about what we are doing, and also probably it will trigger some discussions. That's a little bit the goal. I will not talk about LLMs or RAG or anything like this. I hope you will still, for example, I will ask you to wear your user hat now. Think as if you were a user, not really an engineer or anything like that, okay? So Matthias already introduced Wallapop. So we are a leader in second-hand and unique goods marketplace in Spain, also in Italy, in Portugal. And actually, search is a very challenging topic for second-hand marketplaces. We have very specific challenges in this area. And if we are interested, we can discuss it later as well. I will not spend too much time on this. Actually, what I will present here is not exactly something we have done specifically at Wallapop. It's not a project that we have been doing or anything like this, and everything does not relate 100% to Wallapop, okay? So take it like a general discussion. Let's start by a very simple example, okay? I'm looking for a chair, very, very simple. Maybe today we need a few more actually for the conference so we can buy on Wallapop. I'm looking for chairs, and we have this set of results. Obviously, there are some results that look okay. The ones in the middle look like accessories, not so good, and the one on the right-hand side look more like desks. Probably they sell the desks with the chairs, that's why they are matched, but it doesn't seem so good. Now, if you are a user, you are not like an engineer or anything like this, do you think this result is good for you? You can raise your hand if you think it's good. Wow. And if we only look at the two first results, is it good for you? Yeah, a little bit better. Now, if you look at, you're not a user, you're the CEO or I don't know, CTO maybe as well. What do you think? Is it good or not so good? Yeah, it's maybe a little bit better, especially if there are some of those ads that are promoted. You know, like this morning, we have seen with the friends from OLX, some of the ads usually are promoted for different reasons, and you want to give more visibility to those ads. And maybe that's what's happening to those desks here. They are here because of they are promoted or not, I don't know. Okay, so overall, I guess you all know what precision and recall is. We will talk about it a bit later as well. It's a very old problem, but it's still very important today, and especially in those two contexts, e-commerce and marketplaces, but not only, it can also apply to other places. So as similar to like in many social media feeds, many search results pages look like infinite scrolls. No, you start searching, you see results, and you keep scrolling. You can scroll forever. You will always see results, no? And this is why, no, when you think about it, the first part usually is very precise oriented. But when you keep scrolling down, you will end up seeing random results very likely. And this is more what we call here the recall part, no? And why do we want to do this? No, of course, there is like many companies want to foster discovery of the users, to keep them engaged, so that they keep scrolling in order to maybe discover some interesting results at some point. And the second aspect is that many companies like us, we want to avoid zero or very few results because it gives a very poor experience. Probably the worst thing you can show to the user is an empty screen page. So I think we all know this. And also, we have seen this a lot during today's talk. Now we often frame search as two phases, candidate retrieval, and then we have layers of rankings on top of it. And if we want to feed the ranking with the right items, usually what we do is we have a candidate retrieval phase that is kind of relaxed. No, we want to make sure we return all the possibly relevant items to the rankers. And this leads as well to having a huge list of results that we want to re-rank. The problem, I think we all know it, many users actually scroll a lot. And I don't know, maybe you don't have access to this data, but when you look at it, you might be surprised. They do scroll a lot in the search results. And so what happens is that obviously they end up seeing results that are not relevant for them. And another classical problem of search is when they start changing the sort order from relevance to something else, bam, you start to really show completely random stuff. And this happens when you really aggressively expand recall. And of course, now in more modern times, with the vector search or dense retrieval, what happens is the game has changed completely with respect to recall. Those techniques are super good at recall and maybe sometimes too good, no? You can always scroll the same way as we said before. And for example, in previous talk, that's what happened. You don't know where to cut because you can always keep retrieving results. So we will look at those things from two perspectives now. User perspective, more precisely user perception, and business metrics. So let's go back to very simple notions here. Precision and recall, we have seen it before. And then we will present what we call user experience metrics, and in the second phase, business metrics. So precision and recall, no need to go too much into detail. Here, precision is the percentage of written items that are relevant, and recall is percentage of relevant items that are returned. And we know that they are contradictory. Nothing new here. Okay, so those ones I forget for now. User experience metrics. Actually, it's something that maybe it's not covered so much in the search community. We talk a lot about NDCGs, CTRs, and so on, but not really looking at user satisfaction. What do the users think about our search? And why is it important? Well, actually, the search experience is way more than just looking at a list of results and making sure that the order is the right one. No? We have to take into account the whole experience. So it includes, for example, suggestions, all the different tools you have, you bring to your users to refine the queries, like filters. You can change the sort order, as you can see here. And of course, for example, spell checker is another classical thing that you have to take into account. So those user experience metrics, they measure satisfaction of the users. It's a very broad topic, but actually there is a lot of formal frameworks behind this. No, all these UX frameworks that have been studied for a long time. They are used a lot in different companies, and we want to see how it matches with our search practice. So here I will just consider one very simple example, which is this pyramid of user needs. No, it tries to model what is the feeling of the users depending on the maturity of your product. No, on the base of the pyramid you have functional. It means your product is, I mean, it's functional. It works, nothing more, nothing less. It's not broken. It works. That's the basic, no, the foundation of your product. On top of it, you have reliable. It means it works, but also it's stable over time. Latency is acceptable. It will not crash every 2 weeks. And sometimes, I mean, it sounds like super easy, but actually there are lots of technical challenges here to make this possible. The next layer is called usable here. So it means you provide all the tools that the user needs to satisfy the need. No? For example, what we said before, like good suggestion, filters. Saved searches is another aspect of it. So we are not really talking here about the relevancy of the search itself. No, it's more what's on top of it. And then at the top of the pyramid, you have like, it's more like it's purely delightful. You provide a very nice experience to the users. You have this, wow, this product is so cool, it's fantastic. And so this is really the end goal of user experience. But what happens to search? And again, here, I don't want to generalize. It's not always the case. But overall, search is a very common feature in many webs or e-commerce marketplaces. Users, they know how to use search. It's not like, it's not new. No, there's a search box. They type into it, and they know how it works. And so what happens is usually for search, the users, they don't have necessarily the need of a delightful experience. They just want search to work as expected and to work well. And that's very important because it will condition a little bit the feedbacks that you get from your users, and you will see it in a second. So that's what I've written here now. The users usually expect reliable, accurate results, whatever that means, and not necessarily delightful experiences. How do you collect those UX metrics? There are lots of ways you can do it. Here it's just a little extract of it. You can send surveys to your users. You ask questions like, are the search results relevant? And they will rate yes, no, so. And you can ask a lot of questions actually, and you can, out of this, you can extract some metrics that will tell you how satisfied are your users by your search. You can conduct user interviews. It's super insightful. Actually, if you have never done this, I encourage you to do it. You sit down with some users and you see how the users are interacting with the search. And I'm sure you will be super surprised. I mean, we did the exercise and it's like, wow, they are not using search at all the way we were thinking. It's very different. So, but problem of user interviews is that it doesn't scale. It's very biased as well. Depends on the user you select. But still, I think it's more like from an inside perspective that you can use this. I think you cannot read it very well here. You can also add feedback components in your search results and asking your user, do you like it? Do you like it? Blah, blah, blah. You can also input some very input text that the user can fill in, and then you post-analyze it, and it brings a lot of insights as well. And finally, you can check your app reviews. Again, it's very biased, but always super insightful. And it's almost clear they will complain about search. They always complain about search. Even if you have the best search on earth, they will complain about search. That's super fun. I mean, it's not fun, but it's the reality. Here, I mean, it's a super simple slide, but actually I think it's one of the most important. What we have seen here now, what the user tell you when you ask those questions is what they feel. It's the perception of the user. But it might not be the same as the utility for the user. For example, in the end, the users in Wallapop, they use Wallapop for buying things, not for seeing good results. It's very different. And sometimes we have this bias here, like user perception is one thing and user utility is another thing. We will come to it in a few slides, but keep in mind this difference here. So business metric, what I call business metrics here is something I guess we are more used to in this audience. Like now we have talked a lot today about indices, but here I mean also everything related to conversions, no? Search conversions. It can be also user engagement, retention, everything related to zero results. And of course, everything related directly to revenue can be also good business metrics. I will not extend a lot because I think you all know, I think you use them on a daily basis. So now we will go through two examples. We will stay at a very intuitive level. I will not go into more details, but I would like just you to understand more or less the perception that we have here. So the example is as follows. I'm searching for ski boots. And what happens, I have 6 results, but 2 of the results are like nonsense. What? we don't know why there are those two results here. No, the third one and the fifth one here. The other ones, without more context, they look okay. Maybe they are not because maybe the price is super expensive, but at least they look okay like this. So first, we see it from user perspective. So what happens when you see this, and you can ask the users, they will tell you, your search is broken, it doesn't work, there is something wrong. It's a bug, or they don't understand that maybe search is just an algorithm behind that will match things. They don't understand this. And so from a user perspective, this is a very bad result. And now if you look at it from a business perspective, okay, those are just two bad results, but it doesn't really matter. No, they will not be clicked. And that's it. No, it's not a big drama, no? It's almost similar to having ski boots that will not be clicked. It's not a big deal. Now I take the opposite example, which is I still have my query ski boots and I return two. But I know that in my catalog, I had a lot more ski boots that could have been relevant, but for whatever reason, they will not return to the user. So what happens now, I still look at this from user perspective. Well, I see two pair of boots, it's good. And so there is no impact on the user because the user cannot know that there were other boots available in the catalog. So it's, in the worst case, maybe the user will think that the catalog is poor or the application is, there are not enough sellers to sell boots, but the user will never complain about this search result. It's super precise, fantastic. However, from a business perspective here, this recall issue can be dramatic because depending on the number of boots that you have failed to match, if you look at your metrics, of course, they can be super impacted. So you have a big opportunity loss here. So as I said, it's just from purely intuitive level, what we see is, but actually in practice, it works very well. If you disagree with this, we can discuss it later, no problem. But overall, what happens is user perception of search is highly correlated to precision, and the business metrics highly correlated to recall that you have seen before. And exactly in the same way, we have this contradiction between the two. It's a little bit counterintuitive because, for example, we all use NDCG because it's supposed to be super correlated with user experience as well. So something seems to be broken here. And as an open controversial question, we can wonder if, for example, business metrics are more correlated to the utility that I discussed before. It's not super clear, but it could be the case. So now, two extreme cases. And I've seen this a lot in different companies. No, one case, your team is completely obsessed in optimizing NDCGs, rankings, conversion rates, and you are using all the most fancy ML models around, and it's the only thing that your team is doing. Very likely, you would benefit from just forgetting this about for a moment. You take your user hat and you see, maybe you have something very basic broken in your search experience. Check your favorite searches, I don't know, your suggester maybe is not as good as it should be. And maybe this will bring a lot more value than just keeping iterating small decimals of NDCGs on your search. It's an extreme case. I know most of us, we are not like this. Second case is the opposite. There are teams that are super user-centric, only looking with obsession at the surveys, NPS scores, and app reviews. And very likely, they are tending towards optimizing too much for precision. And it's almost sure that they are losing a big opportunity by not checking a recall in those cases. So again, I'm generalizing. It's not always like this, but I think it happens in many cases. Okay, now from the people here, who is on the tech side of search, like engineers, data scientists, ML scientists? Yeah, quite a lot. And how many are more on the product side, I don't know, product managers, designers, a bit less. So you will tell me if this applies to you or not. I'm not sure. So usually what happens is that the first case that I explained here, we see a lot of teams heavily relying on search engineers, ML scientists, all those kind of more tech profiles. They tend to focus a lot more on those aspects of purely NDCGs and so on. And the teams that are more centric, like with a lot of weight on the product management side, designer, UX researchers, usually they see it very differently. They don't care about NDCG at all. And you can say that you want to use, I don't know, a fancy algorithm. But why? Because your search is broken, doesn't really make sense, no? So overall, I think the overall search community will gain a lot if we manage to close this gap between the two views. Let me check my time. Okay, we will illustrate a little bit this difference on the query specificity example here. Okay, and we will see cases where expanding too much on recall can also hurt a lot the user. I take an example here, which is very basic. I have a query which is Fender, so it's a music brand. And at this stage, we don't know more. Like it can be anything. It can be a guitar, it can be an amplifier, it can be anything of this brand. And you see there are quite a lot of results. Now, if I keep typing, I enter Fender Stratocaster, which is a type of guitar. So now we know that it's a guitar. So when you do this, you see there are less results, no? It's pretty intuitive. And if I keep writing, I get to a point where I have very few results. And this behavior when the query specificity increases, and you see less and less and less results, it's something very intuitive for the users. They are expecting this from a search engine. They are not expecting to see the same number of results when you increase the specificity of the query. And now in many, many places, you see this behavior is broken. You will see always the same number of results, no matter what is the query specificity. No, so like the intuition of the user is when you increase specificity, which is this axis here, you should see a decrease on number of results. And pretty quickly, you will get to a point where you have 0 results, which is logical, I would say. The big problem here is, and we all know it, when you get to this phase where you have 0 or very few results, it's not good for the users, and it's not good for the business neither. So this is the little icon we show to our users when there is no results. And now one of the goals is to avoid this. Now it's very bad for the users. So actually, there are 2 reasons for having 0 results. No, one is you don't have any relevant results in your catalog. In this case, it's very good to say to your user, okay, I don't have any relevant result for you. It's transparency, you know? And actually, I think Eric Pugh gave a talk on this, I don't know when, 1 year ago or so. So some of you, I think, know this guy. And so this is one reason for not getting relevant results. The second reason for getting 0 results is you have actually in your catalog relevant results, but something went wrong in the matching phase, in the retrieval phase, and you could not match, you could not find those items. No, in this case, of course, you need to improve your recall, but not at all costs. Actually, something interesting in real life is that in the end, if you think about it, the probability of a bad matching happening when the query specificity increases is also increasing because the more words you have, the more probability you have of having typos, synonyms in between that can prevent the matching, vocabulary gap, of course, over specification as well. No, users type writing words that are not so useful, but they will kill the matching. And so this happens a lot. Now, if you look at it from a little bit more modern eyes, no, for example, if you do a pure old school keyword matching with an AND, you will see this behavior that the users are expecting. Like the more words, the less results. It's like what you get in common search engines. Now, if you do some vector search, assuming you will retrieve the top K, you will get K all the time. Doesn't really matter how many terms or specificity you have. And so basically the user intuition is broken here. And even if you go for other types of techniques like split, for example, no, this sparse query expansion, it can even be worse. Like the more words you add, the bigger is your expansion and the more results you will get when you do the dot product. So what happens is that usually this zone here is fantastic for the business because you manage to return a lot of content to the users and very likely the metrics will go up. But because you completely break the intuition for the user on this topic, this is not so good for the user in the end. So you want to be, if you want to go in this space, you need to do something for your users because otherwise on the long term, you might have some issues like users might not be retained or might go to another app, for example. Even if, again, if in terms of NDCGs and so on, maybe this is fantastic. So here what we see now is aggressively improving recall for specific queries. It's true that it will help you tackle the zero or few results problem. And very likely it will be good for your business metrics, but you should not forget about this user perception aspect. So the question is, how can we be in this space here, but taking into account what the user expects, no? So here, again, it's not really specific to Wallapop. And I'm sure you will have better solution than this, but I would just provide some guidance on things we can do, and probably things that some of you are already doing. So an obvious thing, I guess, probably if you are using like semantic search, vector search, or whatever, probably you are already doing things like this, no? Which is post filtering, because your retrieval can go a little bit crazy. So at least if you make sure you post filter some of the results to make sure, I don't know, for example, you are in the right category, you will probably limit the risk of having very bad results. So that's what we call here filtering out defects. So this is overall not to limit those kind of examples, but it will not help with the query specificity example I've shown before. The second option is actually, because we are always talking about search results, but you can also change the UI of your search. And it's not so hard. If you think about it, it's not so hard. So what about, instead of having one infinite feed of results, you can just split into two parts. One super focused on precision, and the other ones, you can call it like a more recall part, no? A recall section. In this case, it can be good because, for example, in the first section, I can show my exact matches, which is basically the ones I am almost 100% sure they correspond to the intent of the user. In my case of before, I would show the only exact guitar that the user is looking for. And then in the other section, I can show basically what I want. Doesn't really matter. I can promote a lot if I want the promoted items for the business. And I can also avoid zero results because maybe there is not exactly this model here. I can relax a little bit. I can use the techniques that René shared last year, for example. And so it can also be a very good strategic change, no? Because you have very little risk on the second section. So it sounds like a good compromise. However, of course, it comes also with some drawbacks. You add some complexity into it. You have to manage now two sets of results. So in terms of logging, also if you want to collect the feedbacks of the users, it might not be so easy as before. And also the question of always, no, where do you cut? No, how do you decide that this one should be in the first section and this one in the second one? This depends a lot on on your business, it's not so easy. But at least you have decoupled the two things. And from a user perspective, it's more intuitive. Okay, and also very important in the light of what we have seen just before, if you think about it, we are always optimizing things for the average user because we are taking averages everywhere in NDCGs in all the metrics. But in the end, an average user does not exist. They are very different, the users. And for example, we see it in Wallapop. Now there are users that clearly prefer simplicity of the search box. They type everything in the search box and they start to write in natural language because now it's more normal. Even the price filter, they would write looking for chairs under 20 euros. And there are some users, and there will always be users that prefer the hardcore filter experience, and you need to provide filters. So they would write chair, and you need to provide filters that make sense, like in price, in seller rating, or whatever. So, and overall, when you listen to your users in those interviews or whatever, you will see that those kind of users are still very important. Because maybe also those are core users that use your app since a lot of time, and they are not taking changes in your product in a very positive way. So you don't want to lose them. And there are very simple things you can do, and you should not forget about those things. It's very easy to enable in your UI the user to search on title only or exact matches, so very basic things that you had like 20 years ago. Pretty easy to implement, but it can bring a lot of value to your users. I've seen your some takeaways. So overall, when you build a search system, it's not all about NDCGs and so on. You have to take into account business metrics, but also the user perception metrics. Again, sit down with your users and talk to them. It's very insightful. Overall, and if you disagree or if you have a different experience, we can discuss it later, but overall business metrics, they are more related to recall and user perception, and I insist it's perception of the user. It's more related to precision. So it's kind of the same old trade-off that we have always had in search. An important point that we have briefly discussed is that user perception that you collect via those metrics, in the end, is not the same as user utility. And here, again, I think we should open a discussion. Maybe it's the same, but maybe it's not. And of course, you should not blindly trust your business metrics, but also not blindly trust your user perception metrics. The two are kind of flawed, and in the end, I think it's better to look at them holistically and the two at the same time. We know in the case of query specificity, we have seen in the end, there are simple ways you can optimize recall without impacting precision too much. At least without compromising the experience. And I mean, there are other techniques than the one we have seen here, but sometimes it's very easy, and it's even easier to do those kind of things than trying to complexify too much your ranking algorithm to take multi-objectives or whatever. No, sometimes it's better to take like a step back and think about the overall experience. And of course, for example, at some point, depending on the maturity of your product, you might want to decide to change the UI and add sections, for example. But maybe in a few years from now, the maturity of your product has changed and you want to move back to one single section. It really depends on the maturity of your product and also on business priorities. And finally, for those two things, non-business metrics and for user metrics as well, it's very important to keep experimenting, measuring. It's like everything is about feedback loops now, as we have seen this morning. So I think we all know it for the models we use. We want to do A/B testings and so on, but it's also true for the user perception metric. You want to set up a system where you can track them and also make sure you are not degrading through time. And it's interesting here we have discussed about those user perception metric, and it could be interesting to discuss if they are somehow linked to the UBI metrics we have discussed this morning. It's not exactly the same thing, but maybe there are ways to log those as well in a similar framework. Okay, and I think that's all. Gracias. And
Thank you, Julien. Do we have any questions here in the audience?
Thanks for the talk. I was wondering, how do you advise engineers to take on the user's hat? Do you think they should just look at the results from a user's perspective, or should get involved in the user interviews or stuff like that?
yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, that's what we invite them directly to assist to those interviews. And usually that's what happens is that they are surprised because the users are not behaving as expected. And also because engineers, they are quite used to metrics, to those NDCGs and so on. So also checking more like on a quarterly basis on those surveys, even looking at the reviews and so on, is a little bit the same. No, it's like, it tells you a lot about your search. So yeah. And
Thanks.
it's not too hard in the end. And usually it comes from, it's driven by UX researchers or product managers. So usually we need those profiles to encourage search engineers to look at this. And I would say the other way around is true as well. Like quite often UX researchers, designers, and so on, they only look at user metrics. But when you talk about NDCGs, they think that you are just crazy optimizing. But so yeah, it's like both sides. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll take that home.
Thank you. We have one question online. It's a bit longer. I try to interpret or paraphrase. So the question is whether we can use explicit user feedback, like disliking a certain search result, and use that as kind of a feedback loop to use more personalized models that optimize or find a different balance between precision and recall, like reinforcement learning for human feedback. Is that something that would improve the situation in your opinion, or is that a viable approach?
I think it's a great question. I think usually what happens is that it might not be so scalable, because if you need to collect those feedbacks, and users will not spend a lot of time giving feedback. So I think it's a very useful signal you can use. You can even use it to train your models and so on, or to monitor. I think the difficulty here is to have really a scalable solution that you can collect enough of those feedbacks. So up to getting to a point where you can personalize it, yeah, maybe, because if a user gives you clear insight that something is wrong, you can easily introduce it in your personalized experience. But overall, I think at least the way we do it, it's not really scalable, because also we don't provide like a way to give feedback on each single result. No, it's more every X positions, we show like a small box to request feedback. So I think what is proposed in the question is more having a specific button somewhere to get the feedback. So.
Thanks. Another question?
Hi, thanks a lot. Yeah, I really like the presentation. I really agree with the idea that, user experience has to be really important in this stuff. My question is, or my understanding of like a lot of search applications is that things like recall are kind of unknowable, because a lot of the time you don't actually know what the true positives are that you're searching for, right? So how do you get around that, or what sort of metrics are you actually using to approximate recall here?
Can you please repeat? I couldn't hear the second part of your...
If you have a situation where you don't actually know what the most relevant results are for a query, how do you calculate recall?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Actually, the example I've shown is pretty easy because even if you think about it as exact match or exact term match, then you know where to stop, no? But in most of the cases, I agree with you, it's complex. You could have like, no, actually what we have quite often is the relevance does not only depend on the semantic relevance. There is many things happening, no other factors that are also important. So at least in marketplaces, what happens sometimes is that you can have a dedicated model only for purely semantic relevance on top of it. And then you can use it to decide if it's good enough for the first part or not. But it's very specific to second-hand C2C marketplaces and might not work in other places. But I agree with you. That's the whole challenge of this. You don't know where to stop. Yeah.
Okay, any more questions? Right.
Muchas gracias for the nice presentation. I wanted to ask, you mentioned a bunch of very pragmatic, practical tools to understand what your users are doing better. Have you ever used session recordings as a way to observe what users are doing when you are really not watching? Like, I mean, real recordings, like video.
You mean recordings of the users?
Of the session.
Yeah, that's what I meant by user interviews. So we see the user directly.
No, not user interviews, but like getting users to accept some parameters and just tools that record live sessions and you can review later, just screen recording.
No, it's a good point. Now we, at least on my experience, we have not used this, but I can also ask to our UX researchers if it's something we can use. It's a good question. We can maybe talk about it later.
I would love to. I would love to. Thank you.
Yeah. I have a question about the generalizability, about the assumption that precision correlates with the user perception. So I definitely subscribe to it in e-commerce. Maybe less so in B2B, where it's a lot about known item. And if I can't find this item that I know must be there, there might be more about recall. And then there might be more recall dependent domains, like let's say legal search or something. So I don't know, maybe there's always this element of trust which goes with precision, or maybe there's a recall aspect in other domains. So what's your take on that?
It's a very good question. Actually, that's also that why I wanted to trigger is those kind of discussions, because at least in marketplace, it's pretty obvious that if you look at the complaints of the users, it's like 99% of the cases that search is not relevant. It's really about lack of precision of the search. But if you look at then how the business metrics correlate with your changes, it's like, wow, no, it's not precision the problem, it's a recall problem that we have. But I agree with you that it might not apply in other fields. And even in e-commerce, it's true that maybe it's not 100% true. So all of this has to be taken with, it's more like aspirational, but we can discuss it later. It's interesting, and I would be super happy to hear what you think about all this.
Okay, let's thank Julien again for this great talk.